What do I think of Middlemarch? What do I think of glory? Hi guys, I'm Claire, and that was a quote from Emily Dickinson in reference to the immortality that she believed George Eliot had achieved with Middlemarch. Spot on, Emily! As some of you may know, Middlemarch was the top book on my Victober TBR, and I just finished it 24 hours ago, so I'm coming in hot and here to share my thoughts on it. This is a good book, you guys. It's so good. By good, I mean this book is wildly entertaining and literally has everything. And it's also a book about goodness and decency. So let's get into it. Middlemarch was written by George Eliot and it was published in 8 installments from 1871 to 1872, but the events of the book take place from 1829 to around 1831 or 1832. The subtitle of the book is A Study of Provincial Life, and it does indeed follow several characters living in and around the small town of Middlemarch. And when I first started reading this book, I would have said that the story was split fairly equally between 3 central storylines. The first being that of Dorothea Brooke, who is a young and idealistic woman who's searching for a purpose and path in life. The second, which follows Tricia Slipgate, a new doctor in town who is very interested in scientific inquiry. And lastly, Fred Vincy and Mary Garth, who have been friends since they were children, and Fred is in love with Mary, and Mary kind of puts up with his bullshit and makes fun of him because she's awesome. Those are the 3 main storylines, and as the book moves along, you get a little bit more emphasis on Dorothea and Lydgate's storylines, and then in the latter half of the book, there's another thread concerning the wealthy town banker, Mr. Bulstrode, whose actions have a significant impact on a lot of the other main characters. For now, I would like to focus on the A, B, and C plot lines that had to do with these young people in their early 20s, and I have to say I was shocked at how relatable this book was. And I don't just mean relatable in that George Eliot can write sympathetic characters, I mean relatable in that Fred Vincy is 22 years old and has no direction in life and is like, I'm overeducated and now I can't find a job and I don't know what to do, and I'm sitting here as a reader being like, what year is it? Because that was literally me like 18 months ago. I wish someone out there had told me that so much of Middlemarch is just about messy 20-somethings making dumb decisions and being racked with anxiety about their futures, because if I had known that, I probably would have read it like a lot earlier. I think where the book is really so incredibly and enduringly relevant and relatable is the way in which George Eliot portrays these young people who are still young enough to be filled with these hopes and dreams and visions of what they might do and who they might love and all the things that they might achieve, but they're also reaching the points in their lives where they have to start making decisions and they have to start acting on those ideas. And in doing so, their kind of airy, gossamer ideas hit the hard reality of the limitations that they all face, and we get to see them in the process of having to reconfigure their expectations or their ideas about what their lives are going to be like. But speaking of characters, I would love to talk to you guys about some of my favorites, because there are a lot of incredible ones in this book, and I have to start with Dorothea Brooke because she is really the heart and soul of this book. When the book first opens, she's young and naive and very idealistic and really intense. She is so filled with ambition and a restless energy and a desire to find an outlet for that energy and to do good in the world. And as the book goes along, your heart kind of breaks for her because you just see more and more how much this society in the 1820s really doesn't have a lot of outlets or pathways or options for a young woman to exert any sort of influence. And those limitations lead her to make some pretty ill-advised decisions, and she marries a lame old guy named Mr. Casaubon. And you kind of ache for her because in so many ways she's even more of a trapped bird than someone like Jane Eyre is. And I have to say, sometimes she verges on being a little bit too good-hearted and a little too pious, and she seems almost too good to be true. But there's a moment towards the end of the book where she's kind of having a meltdown and lying on the floor and feeling sorry for herself, and I think that moment of weakness really kept her real for me. So she's wonderful. And then there's Will Ladislaw, who is the young, curly-headed, vibrant cousin of Dorothea's old man husband, and he and Dorothea strike up a friendship that quickly turns to a deep and abiding love on Will's part. And I've read a lot of things that say Will Ladislaw is a more shallow, one-dimensional, insubstantial character, especially when put next to Dorothea, and I guess I understand that, but I also just found him so endearing as kind of this outsider in Middlemarch who's a little bit odd, a little bit aloof. Everyone thinks he's like kind of strange, and I love a guy who loves a kind of weird and intense chick like Dorothea. Then there's Mary Garth, who, as the book goes on, becomes more and more of kind of a secondary or side character. She's the best. She's plain, which I always appreciate, and she's got a sharp wit and a sharp tongue, and she loves Fred Vincy even though he's a doofus, but she also has a deep respect for herself, and even though she loves Fred, she won't commit herself to him until he gets his life together and becomes an upstanding, contributing member of society. So Mary Garth is the MVP. And I like Fred Vincy, I have to say mostly because he loves Mary so much, and I feel like that's kind of his primary characteristic in this book besides being sort of like a human golden retriever. He's kind of a dummy, but I do really appreciate Fred's arc in this book, and I think the scene towards the end where he sees Lydgate at the Green Dragon gambling and kind of realizes that he doesn't want to be that guy is an excellent conclusion for him and growth for him, and I'm really proud of you, Fred. I'm glad you pulled yourself together. And then I have to say, I think my favorite character in this book would have to be Mr. Fairbrother, who's a local vicar who has a small living, so he's never had the means to marry anyone, even though he's always had a high regard for Mary Garth. And he's a little bit older than all of the other characters. He's around 40, so he has some more life experience, and his life is by no means tragic, but it does consist of some disappointments that kind of quietly just knock the wind out of you because he is such a good dude. And the moments where he kind of gives those small, resigned shrugs, I think are just some of the most sublime moments in the book. So God bless Camden Fairbrother because he is the best. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the narrator of this book, who is a character in and of herself, and it is really through the narrator's omniscience that George Eliot's wit and insights shines through in this book. These wonderful generalizations and observations about humanity and life are sprinkled throughout this book like bits of sea glass and wisdom that are so wonderful. And then I feel like I have to talk about Tricia Slipgate because next to Dorothea, he's kind of the other central hero of this book, and I think a lot of people consider him the tragic hero of Middlemarch, and I guess I just didn't feel as bad for him as some people do. I feel like he and Dorothea are kind of two sides of the same coin in some ways, in that they're both so passionate and ambitious, and they're both hemmed in by their situations. And I think that they respond in really different ways, and I think Lydgate responds poorly, and I think that he sows the seeds of his own destruction in a lot of ways. I know that a lot of people say that Rosamond is the source of his downfall and that she's manipulative and he's trapped in this marriage, but I think in a lot of ways he makes her life horrible too. And I think towards the end of the book you really see shades of Casaubon in him in terms of what he expects and wants out of a wife, and I also think that you see shades of Mr. Bulstrode when Lydgate is trying to rationalize some of the choices that he's making. So I don't know if he's really that good of a person, and I hear a lot of people saying, oh, Lydgate and Dorothea should have ended up together. And I'm kind of like, should they have? I don't know if that would have been great for Dorothea. Maybe it would have been good for Lydgate, but I feel like he's a guy who should really be married to his work because I'm not sure he fully sees women as people. One of the things I also love about the book is the way that it weaves all these characters' different threads together. And I think that while I was reading the first half of the book, I was like, this is really kind of like 3 separate novels just stacked one on top of the other. But once you hit the middle point of the book around there, George Eliot slowly starts bringing some of these characters into each other's storylines in a subtle and realistic way. And I think one of the real strengths of this book is that I really think George Eliot gets the small town right. There's an Alice Munro story where she talks about a guy as being someone who would say that he knew everybody in town, but in reality he knows about half of them. And I think that that is like the perfect description of like small town life, and I think it really comes through in Middlemarch. In reality, you know, Fred and Mary Garth really wouldn't come into contact with Dorothea Brooke very much, and in the book they don't. And I think that that makes it really powerful when certain characters do finally come into contact with each other. And the scene with Rosamond and Dorothea when they finally meet and then have a confrontation is all the more powerful because you've been spending all this time with them separately and know things about them that they don't know about each other. And then when they finally collide, it is so fascinating and entertaining. The realism of this book can be seen most sharply in sort of the way in which all of these characters' storylines wrap up. I love this book because it resists the high drama and the climactic conclusions that you might find in a book like Jane Eyre or a more dramatic Victorian novel. And this book is looking not so much at who gets a happy ending or not, but it looks in a broader sense at who has lived a good life and what does it mean to live a good life. As someone who's feeling uncertain about the future myself, this book and the conclusion of it just kind of washes over you and gives you a sense of relief that, you know, whatever the future may hold, whatever you accomplish or don't accomplish, at the core of it, be a good person, be good to other people. It's harder than it looks sometimes, and it's not a bad thing to strive after. And I think that's why the final lines of this book are just so exquisite, because they're a celebration of ordinary life and ordinary people, and it's just beautiful. So I want to leave you with those lines. The growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. So if you've ever thought about reading Middlemarch but have been intimidated by the length, I would really encourage you to give it a go. Happy Victober, guys! Read Middlemarch, have a great time, let me know what you think, and see you soon.